I used to think I understood exactly how my family operated, who handled what, who got prioritized, and who was expected to step aside. But one afternoon in early December, when my mother placed an envelope on the kitchen table and looked at me without blinking, I realized how naive I had been. That envelope didn't hold a Christmas card or a family photo. It was a financial commitment entirely for my younger brother, while I, the one who had covered most of our household bills for nearly 10 years, wasn't even mentioned. If you've ever had to choose between dignity and family, leave a comment, hit like, share this story, and follow the channel so you don't miss what comes next. My name is Juliet. I'm 31, and I work as a logistics manager for a regional grocery chain in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm the oldest of three siblings, and I was always taught that responsibility was a form of love. The problem was, only I was taught that. As a kid, I'd wake up early to help my dad cook breakfast. In high school, I took part-time jobs so my mom wouldn't have to borrow money to buy my siblings' birthday gifts. My father, Carl, was a public bus driver, often home late and rarely spoke much. My mother, Sheila, used to work at a pharmacy, but quit once I entered college, saying raising three kids is a full-time job. The truth was, most of that job fell on me. I didn't complain, not because I wasn't tired, but because I believed that's how you keep a family strong. By 24, I had landed my first stable job, owned a beat-up Civic, and was paying the household electric bills. My brother, Brandon, had just finished high school and still had no direction. My youngest sister, Lucy, was still in high school, often sick and heavily doted on by Mom. It never occurred to me that my help would be seen as expected, until the day Mom handed me that envelope, speaking in a soft voice that almost sounded apologetic, but her eyes gave her away. "Your sister has a steady job now," she said gently. "And you're still figuring things out, Brandon. Starting with a small car wash could work. I've already spoken to Marilyn at the bank." I hadn't opened the envelope yet, but I saw her handwriting on the corner. Startup support. Brandon. I glanced at Brandon. He just shrugged and kept eating his cereal like it was perfectly natural for Mom to use the family savings to fund him. I clenched my fists, nails digging so deep into my palms that they stung. "Where did the money come from?" I asked, trying to stay calm. Mom didn't answer right away, then she finally said, "Part of it came from that emergency fund you used to send. You know that was for the whole family." "No," I said slowly. "I sent it in case the whole family had an emergency, not to invest in someone with no plan beyond just try and see." Brandon set his spoon down and laughed. "You're acting like an auditor. Didn't you say money in the house is for the house?" I looked at him, at his calm face, the unbothered eyes, and I realized that to him, I was never a person, just a walking ATM. Mom sighed. "Juliet, don't make this bigger than it is. Brandon needs a chance. You have a good job, a car, insurance. What does your brother have? You can't be selfish." I stood up, grabbed my coat, and said just one thing before leaving that kitchen. "If helping someone means being taken advantage of, maybe I've been generous for too long." I drove around Squirrel Hill until dusk. My mother's words kept echoing in my head. "You can't be selfish." I had once canceled my only planned trip that year to cover Lucy's hospital bills, turned down a promotion so I could stay close and drive Brandon to rehab again. I had believed that sacrifice was the right thing. But no one told me, if you're the only one giving, that's not love, it's exploitation. I parked outside the old bakery I worked at during college. The scent of cookies drifting from the vent carried a strange warmth, tinged with quiet sadness. I wondered, if I disappeared from the family for a while, would anyone even notice? My phone rang. "Brandon." I didn't pick up. I had no idea that was only the beginning. I got back to my apartment a little after 9 p.m. The light snow dusted the wooden steps leading up to the old building in East Liberty. My Civic, parked along the curb, was lightly frosted over. I stood for a moment, staring at it, hands buried deep in my coat pockets. There was something inside me that felt drained. Not quite sadness, not quite anger, more like the feeling when you reach into the fridge for that carton of milk you always count on, only to find someone else emptied it and didn't bother to tell you. I walked down the dim hallway and into the one-bedroom apartment I'd rented for over 3 years. Not fancy, but warm enough. I kicked off my shoes, hung up my coat, turned on the kitchen light, and grabbed a bottle of water. Outside the window, streetlights cast a soft glow through the fogged glass. It was so quiet I could hear the low hum of the heater. My phone lit up again. Brandon, 7th time in 3 hours. I held down the screen and silenced all notifications. On the table was a folder I brought home from work, a distribution plan for Lunar New Year inventory across our regional stores. I was supposed to review it, page by page. But tonight, I didn't want to think about timelines, budgets, or supply chains. I just wanted to understand what had really happened and why, for all these years, I thought I was being loved when I was just being useful. I lay down on the couch. The kitchen light spilled softly onto the ceiling. I remembered nights back at Penn State, calling home to ask if Mom needed anything, and always hearing, "You just focus on school, we're fine." Meanwhile, I'd pull part of my scholarship money to help pay the electric bill. I remembered a spring night when Brandon got into a fight at a gas station and the police called. I drove through the night from Pittsburgh to Erie to bail him out and hide it before Dad could find out. When I got home, Mom made me a plate of cold eggs and said, "You're the older sister, you understand, right?" I think that's when I started confusing responsibility with love. The next morning, walking into work, I felt like I was carrying a block of ice on my back. My coworkers greeted me like usual, but I just nodded, slid into my desk, and turned on the computer. The screen lit up, but my mind stayed suspended somewhere between job deadlines and a family that didn't allow fatigue or refusal. Not 10 minutes later, I got an email from Mom. No greeting, just the subject line, "Please think this through." I read the first paragraph and bit down lightly on the inside of my cheek. "I don't understand why you're reacting like this. I'm not favoring anyone. You're the strongest in the family. You know I'm just trying to give your brother a future. He just needs a start. Then he'll be fine." I hit delete. No reply. Later that day, I left work an hour early. As I was packing up my laptop, a text came in from Lucy. "Hey, Mom's really upset. Can you come home for dinner?" I stared at that message for a long time. Lucy, the quiet one, never demanding but also never on my side. I texted back, "I'm busy." I stopped at a small cafe near the square, ordered an espresso and a slice of banana bread. In the cozy space, soft jazz played in the background. I watched strangers talk, laugh, rush, slow down, each living on their own rhythm. I opened my phone and pulled up the bank files. Nearly $8,000 I had sent over the past 2 years were all labeled for home expenses: electricity, water, roof repairs, hospital bills. But I had never once seen an actual bill. Everything had gone through Mom. I had never questioned it, because I trusted. Now I started wondering how much more trust had I given to the wrong people, just to keep a family from falling apart. The espresso had gone cold. I didn't finish it. Outside, the snow had stopped. I pulled out my notebook and wrote a list. Not a work plan, not this month's budget. I wrote personal transfers, paused. Bank card, disconnect. Find independent financial advisor. Check ownership of the current house. Schedule appointment with a state attorney. I stared at those 4 lines, my hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the strange relief of finally taking control after years of letting others decide for me. It was fully dark when I left the cafe. The wind had picked up, but wasn't biting. I tightened my scarf, walked faster, didn't look back. I wasn't sure where this would lead, but I knew I wasn't going back to how things were. Because one day I'd have to choose between continuing to endure or finally living in alignment with my worth. That night, I chose to begin. I couldn't have imagined that just a week later, one phone call would shift everything. The call came on Monday morning while I was waiting for coffee to brew in the tiny office kitchen. My screen lit up with Mom's name. I didn't answer. A few minutes later, a message popped up. Can you come home this weekend? There's something important. I read it 3 times. What could possibly count as important after everything they'd done without asking me? I worked like a robot the rest of the morning, eyes on spreadsheets, fingers typing, but my mind elsewhere. By noon, I stepped out for a walk around Shadyside, gripping my phone in my coat pocket. It was still cold, but faint sunlight lit up patches of dirty snow on the sidewalk. Every step felt heavier, not from ice, but from the creeping sense this might be another setup. I texted Lucy first, "Are you going home this weekend?" She replied in under a minute, "Yes, Mom called all 3 of us, said it's urgent." I answered, "Okay." I didn't want to go, but I needed to know what they were planning, and if something was being hidden, I didn't want to be the last to find out. Saturday afternoon, I drove back to Erie. The highway was clear, but strong winds made the car sway lightly. I didn't play music. I needed the silence to steady myself. In the trunk was a folder I had printed, bank statements, transfer logs, and a copy of the ownership documents for the house my parents lived in. I still wasn't sure whose name was on the deed, but I intended to find out. I parked in front of the house just before 5 p.m. The sky was gray, snow dusted the grass. The house looked the same, brown brick walls, pale green curtains in the windows, and a slightly tilted wooden porch frame. I had grown up here, and now, whenever I looked at it, I no longer felt warmth, only claustrophobia. Mom opened the door. She wore a beige sweater, dark circles under her eyes, but her smile was still forced. "You made it. Come in." In the kitchen, Brandon was already there, legs crossed like he was at a bar. Lucy stood at the sink, stacking dishes. No one greeted me. I hung my coat, washed my hands, and sat at the long wooden table. No one made eye contact. Mom sat down. "I'll get straight to the point. We have a chance to buy the corner convenience store. From Ron, he's retiring, offering a great price. Brandon will be on the deed, but we're all contributing. It's a big opportunity." I looked at Lucy. She shrugged. "I don't have money, but I'll help with operations. Mom says Brandon needs someone to help manage the books." I turned to Mom. "What's your contribution?" She looked at me. "The house. Your dad signed off a while ago. We'll mortgage it to secure the initial funding." I nodded slowly. "So you're putting up the house as collateral, and the store will be in Brandon's name?" She nodded. "He's the son. He needs a foundation to build from." I placed both hands on the table. "Whose name is the house under?" She hesitated. "It used to be both your father's and mine. But last year, to simplify the bank paperwork for the roof loan, I transferred it to Brandon's name." My back stiffened like someone had just laid a sandbag across my shoulders. "No one thought to ask me? You don't live here anymore." I let out a dry laugh. "And who paid for the roof repair? Who's been sending money every month under the label household expenses?" Brandon cut in, voice annoyed. "You're always calculating. We're family, not strangers." I looked straight at him. Family doesn't mean treating someone like a walking wallet. No one said a word. Finally, Mom spoke softly. "You should think about your brother. He's never had anything of his own." I nodded slowly, pulled the printed bank statements from my bag, and laid them on the table. "This house is everything I sent money for. It was my hope to keep this place together. Now you've mortgaged it, put it in Brandon's name, and ask me to understand?" Mom picked up the papers, but said nothing. Brandon frowned. Lucy stared at the floor. I stood up, slipped on my coat. "Starting today, do not use my name for any financial activity. And if this house collapses under these decisions, I will not be cleaning up the damage." I turned away, heard the faint scrape of a chair behind me. No one called me back. I don't know if they understood what I just said, but I knew things between us would never go back to what they were. Driving back to Pittsburgh, I kept the cabin dark. Outside was a dense stretch of black. Only the soft glow of taillights from the car ahead lit the way. And I didn't yet know that in that darkness, a familiar name would resurface the following week, carrying an offer I never saw coming. 3 days after I left Erie, I got a call from an unknown number. I was in the middle of checking warehouse inventory when my phone buzzed nonstop in my coat pocket. I was going to ignore it, but something told me to pick up. Juliet, is that you? This is Marvin, a friend of your father's. I'm calling from Traverse City. It took me a few seconds to place him. Marvin used to work with Dad at the old transport company before Dad switched to driving city buses. A quiet man, always with a cigar, voice rough like smoke had settled in his throat. Sorry for the sudden call, he continued, but Carl reached out last week. He said he had some documents he wanted to pass to you through me. Told me to wait until you got in touch. I gripped the phone tighter. What kind of documents? Didn't explain much. Just said it had to do with the house on Maple Street and some money from back in 2019. I arranged to meet him on Saturday at a diner by the lake in Traverse City. That's where Marvin had moved after retiring. I didn't tell Mom. Didn't say a word to Brandon or Lucy either. Something in me said to stay quiet until I truly understood what was going on. That morning, I left Pittsburgh at 5:30 a.m. Light snow dusted the highway, and the sun hadn't risen yet. The drive took over 4 hours, but my mind kept circling three things: the house, the 2019 money, and why my dad had wanted me to be the one to receive those things. I was never close to him. Our relationship hovered, distant enough to avoid conflict, but never close enough to share anything personal. Still, he was fair. Quiet, but he never demanded anything from me, not like Mom. The diner, where Marvin suggested meeting, sat right on the edge of Frozen Lake, mist hanging low like a silver scarf. I walked in, fingers still frozen despite my gloves. Marvin sat in a corner, hands wrapped around a coffee mug, gray hair matching his worn leather jacket. He stood up to shake my hand. His grip was rough, firm. You look like him when he was young, he said, something flickering behind his eyes. Not quite emotion, more like he was acknowledging something unspoken. We sat. I ordered a black coffee, no sugar. I'll be direct, he began. Carl took out a life insurance policy and pulled aside part of his retirement savings in your name. He did it after you moved back to Pittsburgh for work. In 2019, he asked me to hold on to a file for you, along with a handwritten letter. He told me to only give it to you if he felt you'd been pushed out of what was rightfully yours. I didn't move. My hands gripped the table edge, nails pressing into cold wood. He placed a cream-colored envelope on the table. My dad's handwriting was clear. For Juliet, if everyone else stays silent, I want you to know the truth. I didn't open it right away. The envelope felt both sacred and terrifying. After all those years living in the same house, I had never known he had planned anything for me. I think Carl always saw what was happening, Marvin said gently. He didn't talk much, but whenever he mentioned you, his eyes would drift, like he was thinking about something he regretted. I nodded, took the envelope, and tucked it into my coat's inner pocket. Thank you. We parted without needing to say much more. I drove back to Pittsburgh through a gray afternoon. The snow had thickened. At a rest stop, I sat in my car and opened the envelope. Inside were two separate documents: a photocopy of a property authorization form granting me rights to the original lot purchased in 1997, and a bank statement for an account jointly under my name and his, opened 5 years ago, untouched. And finally, the handwritten letter. It wasn't long. Juliet, I'm sorry for staying quiet all these years. I didn't speak up against your mother because I thought it would only make things harder for you. But I didn't want you to wake up one day and feel like you gave everything and got nothing in return. If you're reading this, it means she's gone too far. You have the right to walk away, and you have the right to take back what belongs to you. Uncle. I folded the letter slowly. My head burned, but my hands were cold. Something lit up inside me. Not hurt, not anger. A realization I wasn't alone in this fight. And 1 week later, I would use everything he left behind to redraw the entire board. I spent the rest of Sunday evening reading and rereading every line of my father's letter. Each time I folded it, I opened it again, not to check the content, but to remind myself it existed, that he had seen me, understood me, even if he never said so out loud. Monday morning, I took half a day off to meet with an estate attorney. A friend in the legal department referred me to Erin Callahan's office. She specialized in inheritance law and residential property disputes. Her office sat in a low-rise building on the north side, filled with natural light and the smell of warm oak. Erin was in her early 40s, hair pulled back, voice steady and direct. I handed her the documents, the letter, the bank statement, the property authorization. She read silently. After a few minutes, she looked up. Legally, this is solid. Carl transferred the asset into joint ownership between you and him in 2019. If that property hasn't been sold or mortgaged illegally since then, you absolutely have a claim. I exhaled slowly. But my mother says the house is now in Brandon's name. Ugh, may have happened later, but if the transfer was done without informing you, or while you were still a legal co-owner, it may be invalid. What's the next step? She scribbled notes on a pad. We'll request a formal title report from the local recorder's office. If they process the title without your signed consent, I can file for a temporary legal freeze. After that, we look into the grounds for civil action. I nodded, memorizing each step. I didn't like conflict. But I couldn't keep letting others decide everything as if I didn't exist. On the way home, I stopped by the old bookstore on Liberty Avenue, my usual quiet spot. I sat at a window table and ordered a hot black tea. Outside, the snow had stopped, the sky was clear, but the air bit hard. I opened my phone and read the unread message from Mom, sent the day before. I heard you met Marvin. We need to talk. I didn't reply. Not out of anger. I just didn't feel the need to explain myself anymore. I wasn't a side character in the story they made up. That afternoon, Lucy called. I paused before answering. You doing okay? She asked quietly. I'm fine. I think you should know. Mom's shaken. Someone from the county recorder's office called about the house title. I said nothing. Brandon's furious. He says you're trying to sabotage his business. I leaned back in my chair. I'm not sabotaging anything. I'm just asking the questions that should have been asked from the beginning. Silence. Then Lucy spoke again, more hesitantly. I think Mom pressured Dad into signing the deed over. He was already weak then, but she kept telling him it was just for the roof repairs. I overheard her once on the phone with the bank saying his signature would be enough. I can't be totally sure. Thanks for telling me, I said softly, cutting in. What are you going to do next? Find the truth and reclaim what's mine. I heard her sigh. I'm sorry I didn't say anything sooner. It's okay, you said it now. The call ended. I sat quietly for a while, watching the last streaks of sunlight stretch across the window pane. Something inside me felt still. Not trembling, not confused, just certain. The next day, Erin called me back. Juliet, I heard from the recorder's office. There's something you need to know. I pressed the phone closer, my chest tightening. The house was fully transferred to Brandon's name last year, but here's the strange part. Your signature was forged. I didn't say a word. My fingers curled slowly into a fist. We'll request a handwriting analysis and file a petition with the civil court. If it proves to be forged, the entire transaction will be voided. I thanked her, nodding even though she couldn't see it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I spread every document across the floor, highlighting amounts, transfer dates, and names with a marker. I pinned photos onto a corkboard, piecing it together like a case file. I used to think all I had to do was let go and move on, but now I saw it clearly. Silence, when stretched long enough, becomes permission for others to trample over trust. And I wasn't staying silent anymore. Just a few days, I'd be facing my mother, not with anger, but with evidence. I chose the small diner on 6th Street for the meeting, the one she used to take me to in elementary school whenever I brought home a good grade. Back then, I always ordered the chicken sandwich with corn chowder. She'd have mint tea, her chin propped in her palm, listening while I rambled about quizzes or school plays. That memory used to make me smile, but this morning, it just tightened something in my chest. There was a tattoo on my chest. She arrived 10 minutes late, wearing a faded gray sweater. Her face looked tired but composed, still holding that familiar calm. I stood up to greet her, but didn't hug her. She didn't reach out either. We sat across from each other. I didn't order anything, just poured water from the carafe on the table. She asked for mint tea, as if nothing had changed. "So why'd you ask me here?" she said, voice steady. I pulled the copy of the signature verification from my bag and set it on the table. "This confirms the signature used to transfer the house wasn't mine." She didn't touch the paper, just stared at me, her expression unreadable. "You're planning to sue me?" "I wanted to hear your explanation first," I said, keeping my voice low. "Why did you do it?" She gripped her teacup slightly. "You don't live there anymore." I thought it'd be easier to put the house under Brandon's name. "Easier for who?" I asked. "You used my money, my name, then removed me from any ownership or say. How could you think that was reasonable?" Her lips tightened. "I didn't think you'd react like this." I gave a dry laugh. "Because you assumed I'd stay quiet, just like I have for the last 10 years. Her eyes flickered. She set down her cup but said nothing. I took another folder from my bag and pushed it toward her. "I've spoken with an attorney. If you stay silent, this will go to court." The air between us thickened. She stared at me, and for the first time her voice held an edge. "You're tearing this family apart, Juliet." I didn't blink. "No, Mom. I'm removing what's already broken from a foundation that's been cracked for years." There was a long pause. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in. When she looked at me again, I saw a mix of anger and something else. Hurt. "You think your father would have taken your side. He just wanted peace. That house was always meant for our family, mine and his. Brandon needed a place to start." "What about me?" I leaned forward. "Did you ever consider that I needed a beginning too, instead of constantly carrying everyone else's? If you've ever stayed quiet because no one believed you, or been blamed just for speaking the truth, leave a comment. Share this story if you think someone needs to hear it. Some things can't be fixed if we keep pretending they're not broken." She stood up without another word, grabbed her purse, and walked out. I didn't stop her. My hands trembled slightly, but not from anger. It was something else. Relief. That afternoon, Brandon sent me a voice message, over 2 minutes long. I didn't finish listening. It opened with a scoff, followed by a rant. "You're not heartless. You're just ungrateful. What are you trying to do, burn the whole family down?" I deleted it. No response. A few hours later, Lucy called. Her voice was small and hesitant. "I overheard Mom on the phone with Aunt Carol. She said you're blowing things out of proportion, that you might lose everything if the case doesn't go through." "I'm not blowing anything up, Lucy. I'm ending a chain of wrongs." "I know. Everyone's really tense." "I'm scared she might do something drastic." I paused. If she was afraid of losing something, she shouldn't have signed for me. At the end of the call, Lucy whispered, "If there's anything I can do, just tell me." I sat by the window, watching late winter sunlight catch on the snow, crusting the windowsill. Inside me was a stillness, not empty, but calm, like everything was slowly falling into its right place. The next day, Aaron sent me a hearing date for the preliminary court session. I confirmed. I didn't know how long this would drag on, but I did know the only thing I lacked wasn't courage. It was time to line everything up. Because I was about to get an offer from someone I never expected to stand beside me. On Tuesday morning, while pouring coffee in the office kitchen, I got an email from Aaron. The subject line read, "Urgent Property Update." I opened it immediately. Attached was a local court order, a temporary freeze on any transactions tied to the house in Erie, pending signature verification and legal resolution. The first thing I felt wasn't victory, but clarity, like I'd stepped through a doorway I'd only ever seen through a crack. At the end of the message, Aaron had typed a single line. Someone contacted our office asking to meet you. It's Lucy. I set the mug aside and called her right away. She picked up after 2 rings, voice hoarse. I'm sorry for not warning you. I'm in Pittsburgh now, at the bookstore you always go to. I got there in under 30 minutes. She was sitting by the window holding a mug of hot cocoa, her scarf pulled too tightly around her neck like she was trying to steady herself. Her eyes were tired. When she saw me, she just nodded. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds. I need to talk, she said. Not to take Mom's side, not to go against you either. I'm tired of being caught in the middle. I pulled out a chair. Then be honest, Lucy, when did you find out the signature was forged? She clenched the mug. Last spring. I saw Mom pull out some old paper and call Brandon in. They said something about making it official. Mom told me to leave the room, but I caught parts of it. Later, paperwork came from the bank. I asked, and she said it was just to update the names for a loan. I held her gaze. And you believed her? Not really. I was scared. I thought if I said anything, everything would blow up. I didn't know who to side with. I exhaled. You don't need to pick sides, you just need to tell the truth. She was quiet, then nodded. I'll testify if I have to. Thank you. Lucy bit her lip. Mom's panicking. She keeps calling me, saying I have to convince you to drop the case, that airing this in court will shame the whole family. But I think shame doesn't cover wrongdoing. I placed my hand flat on the table. Want to stay in Pittsburgh for a few days? Get your mind off things? Probably a good idea. I brought Lucy back to my apartment. She didn't seem like the girl hiding behind Mom, but someone trying to find her own way out. We didn't say much on the drive back, and yet I could feel it. The tide was finally shifting. But the air no longer felt suffocating. It was just still, like the kind of quiet that follows a long, chaotic stretch. That evening, I got a call from a blocked number. I hesitated for a few seconds before answering. Juliet, a man's voice came through, clear and steady. This is Hank. Used to work with your dad back at the old freight company. I heard what's going on from Marvin. I straightened up, holding the phone tighter. We've got a small fund. Back in the day, Carl contributed to it, a kind of mutual support account among retirees. He used to say that if anything ever happened, he wanted his portion to go to you. But he never officially filed the paperwork. I stayed silent. He continued. Last week, after Marvin told us everything, we got together. Everyone agreed to pass that amount on to you. It's not much. But Carl was a good man. We believe this is what he would have wanted. I thanked him, voice tight in my throat. After hanging up, I leaned back into my chair. All those years I thought Dad was just absent, that his silence meant he didn't care. But maybe he had been watching in his own quiet way, making amends where he could. The next morning, I got a message from Aaron. The court confirmed the preliminary hearing, March 14th. I took a screenshot and sent it to Lucy. She replied with a single line, I'll be there. I sat by the window, watching thin streaks of sunlight stretch across the frosted sidewalk. Everything was finally beginning to shift. Not by chance, but because I had finally stood still and said, enough. Then, just as I was organizing files for the hearing, an email came in from someone I hadn't expected, Aunt Carol. Subject line, there's something you need to know. I opened it sitting at the kitchen table, a ceramic mug of lukewarm tea beside me. The email was short, barely 2 paragraphs, but every line made me sit absolutely still, eyes fixed on the screen. Juliet? I didn't want to interfere, but after your mom called me 3 times this week, lying about you trying to steal the house and bad-mouthing your father, I can't stay quiet. There's something you need to know. Most of the money used to repair the roof 2 years ago didn't come from your mom. It came from your dad. He pulled it from his retirement fund and quietly moved it into an account under your name to keep it away from your mom. But it seems she somehow got access to those records. I can't say for sure what she did, but during tea that day, she said something that stuck with me. Even if it doesn't belong to her, I know how to take it back. You should go over every transaction from 2021. If needed, I'll testify. Don't let anyone make you doubt your own worth. But Carol, I sat there a few minutes longer, not in shock, just settled, like something inside me had finally clicked into place. I reopened the bank statements I had saved, tracing line by line. March 2021, right around when the roof had nearly collapsed after that early spring storm. There was a transaction listed as residential property improvement deduction, transferred from an account labeled Carl D. Whitmore Retirement to a subsidiary account named JM Logistics Holding. I'd never heard of that account, but it was linked to my personal ID, and I knew for sure I'd never set up any fund by that name. I called Aaron. We need to dig through the entire history of linked accounts tied to the Maple Street property, I said, voice steady. I think my mom used a secondary account under my name, but controlled by her. Aaron's response was brisk. On it. And if we can prove identity misuse, we can file an additional independent claim. I closed the call, walked toward the window. Outside, the sky hung heavy, casting a silver-gray light over parked cars below. Some truths take years to understand. Others fall into place with just one well-timed sentence. That night, Lucy knocked on my bedroom door. Her eyes were red, hands holding a folder. I invited her in. She sat, exhaled hard like she'd been holding it all in. I think I found something you need, she said. I looked at her. She passed me the folder. I went home to grab a few things. In my old room, I found this shoved under the drawer. I don't know if it's important, but I thought you should see it. I opened it. Handwritten bank statements from the local credit union, along with photocopies of a few transfer documents. Also handwritten, with a signature that read, Juliet M. Whitmore, in handwriting that clearly wasn't mine. Flipping through, I found one with Mom's scribbled note in the margin. Submit before the 8th to keep loan. Remember to re-sign. I set the page down, looked at Lucy. Are you willing to give this to the lawyer? Yes, and I'm ready to speak in court too if it comes to that. I nodded. In that moment, we weren't just sisters who had lived under the same roof. We were two women trying to reclaim ground that had been quietly taken from us. The next morning, Aaron confirmed. All accounts tied to the roof repair and upgrades were under my name as trustee. But there were no permissions granted for usage. And the loan application? Filed by my mother, using her personal email, posing as my financial rep. Aaron's message ended with, We've got enough to petition the court for immediate asset freeze. All I need is your go-ahead. I closed my eyes, typed back, confirmed, proceed as soon as possible. I sat back, the weight lifting just slightly. And just when I thought all the cards were on the table, someone unexpected reached out. Not to defend themselves, but to ask for a deal. The call came Friday morning during a Zoom with the logistics team. The name Brandon popped up. I stared at my phone, turned off my camera, pulled out my earbuds, and stepped into the hallway. And answered, voice firm, What do you want? He paused, then spoke, calmer than usual. Can we meet, just the two of us? I narrowed my eyes. What for? Not over the phone, Brandon said. The old diner near the high school. This afternoon. I didn't reply immediately. My fingers tapped the railing outside the stairwell. I didn't trust him, but I wanted to hear what he had to say. 3:00, I said. Then I hung up before he could add anything else. When I arrived, the sky was overcast, the air thick with damp earth. Brandon was already seated, slouched in a corner booth, black jacket rumpled, coffee half drunk. I walked in, kept my scarf on, pulled out a chair across from him. You've lost weight, he started. I leaned back, stayed quiet. Brandon glanced around, then said in a low voice, I'm here to ask you to drop the case. I let out a short laugh, and why would I do that? For Mom. She couldn't sleep, worried all the time. And if this goes to court, I'll get pulled into the investigation. I didn't forge any signatures, but I knew it happened. I raised an eyebrow. How long have you known? Half a year. I nodded. So for 6 months you stayed quiet, even mocked me when I questioned it. And now you want to negotiate? Brandon looked down at his hands. Mom said, if we kept things quiet and gradually transferred ownership back, no one would get hurt. She didn't think you'd take it this far. She wasn't wrong, actually. If this had happened 3 years ago, I might have stayed silent. But not anymore. Brandon exhaled sharply. I'm not here to argue. I just want to find a way to keep the family from falling apart. I tilted my head. That's what I'm trying to do, Brendan. That's why I need justice, not some cover-up disguised as reconciliation. He looked at me, eyes tired. If you don't drop the case, I'll lose everything. The store isn't even open yet, and I'm already in debt. I might end up with a bad credit record. I crossed my arms. What about me? All those years I sent money, carried the debt, got erased from the property deed. What do you think that means? Brandon said nothing. For the first time in his life, he didn't have an excuse. The usual lazy confidence was gone, along with the smug look in his eyes. Here's one way, I said evenly. Transfer the full ownership back into the correct name. Redo the documents legally. I'll consider dropping the civil suit if the lawyers confirm you're cooperating fully. As for the criminal charges, I can't interfere with that. Brandon looked up and nodded slowly. I'll do it. I pulled a paper from my bag, a draft of the verbal agreement with a place for his signature. This is a preliminary commitment. Sign it if you really want to make this right. He took the pen and signed without hesitation. I folded the paper, stood up. Mom might think I'm retaliating, but really, I'm giving this family one last chance. Brandon said nothing. I stepped out into the wind, my scarf catching at my neck. I tightened my coat and walked quickly back to the car. That night, Lucy made spaghetti and I did the dishes. The kitchen felt warmer than usual. While I was stacking plates on the drying rack, she asked softly, "Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive them?" I dried my hands, leaned against the sink. Forgiveness isn't about erasing everything. It's about setting new boundaries. And mine is this. No one gets to dictate my life anymore. Lucy nodded, asking nothing more. The next morning, Aaron called. Brandon came by the office. He brought all the documents, followed through just like you said. I think, at the very least, it's a good start. I nodded, looking out the window, where the first spring sunlight of the year was beginning to touch the bare trees on the balcony. I still didn't know how the hearing would end, but I did know that no matter the outcome, I wasn't going back to where I started, because I had reclaimed the most important thing of all, my voice. And just as I thought I could rest, another letter showed up, not from the court, but from an old bank with something I never expected. It arrived Monday morning, buried between ads and the electric bill. I almost tossed it until I noticed my dad's old bank logo, faintly printed at the top. I sat down at the kitchen table, slid it open with a letter opener. Inside was a notice confirming account closure and full balance transfer to the designated beneficiary, me. I frowned. I'd never heard of this account. But in the upper left corner was a small, printed line, Carl D. Whitmore, Family Housing Fund. I called Erin immediately. It took her less than an hour to confirm. It was a savings fund my dad had set up back in 2017, drawn monthly from his retirement income. The sole purpose, to help me buy a place of my own, completely separate from the old house. Erin spoke evenly. The fund totals close to $84,000, not enough to change your life, but enough to start the next chapter on your own terms. I sat quietly at the window as March sunlight fell across the wooden table. A part of me felt a tightness in my chest, but more than that, I felt seen, prioritized, not out of duty, but out of belief that I deserved it. I thought of all those silent years, how Dad used to take my car in for service each winter without saying a word, or add extra money to my tuition account behind the scenes. Turns out, not everyone shows love with words, but that doesn't make it any less real. 1 week later, I stood in court with my attorney. My mother didn't show, only Brandon came, with his own lawyer. The hearing didn't last long. We presented solid evidence of the forgery, including statements from the bank. The judge ruled to cancel the previous ownership records, restoring the original portion of the property to me. Brandon would be held financially responsible for taking out a loan under my name. Lucy sat in the audience, gripping my hand as the judge read the final paragraph. She didn't say anything, but the look in her eyes told me. Someone was still quietly standing with me. Outside the courthouse, I didn't feel victorious, just light. Things weren't entirely fair, but for the first time, I wasn't the only one expected to step back just to keep a broken family from falling apart. 2 months later, I used the money from Dad's fund to put a down payment on a small apartment in Squirrel Hill, a place where I could see the park, make my own coffee in the mornings, and never again have to hear someone else's footsteps deciding the course of my life. Lucy stops by now and then. We cook, watch movies, and rarely talk about the past. Mom hasn't called, Brandon hasn't either. I'm not waiting. Some wounds don't need stitches, just air and time. I placed a small framed photo of Dad on the bookshelf, and every time I look at it, I don't just remember a quiet man. I remember that I used to carry the weight of an entire household on my back. And now, I carry only what's mine. I don't know where you're listening from, in your car, before bed, or on a day you needed a story to remind you to stand back up. Tell me where you're tuning in from. And if you want more stories like this, honest, unpolished, real, make sure to follow the channel because the next story might be the one you need. Juliet's story wasn't just a legal battle over property. It was a reminder that silence, when prolonged, becomes complicity in injustice. In real life, many people give everything for love until they're pushed out of what they helped build. But justice doesn't only live in courtrooms. It begins when we speak up and protect our boundaries. And sometimes the greatest freedom isn't in beating someone, it's in living truthfully without needing permission to be respected.